I am becoming more powerful than any Jedi has ever dreamed of.
Twisted by the dark side, young Skywalker has become.
Tell me the definition of generational trauma.
Generational trauma are traumatic events and memories and even some genetic factors, and we'll talk about in a second, that are passed down from parents to offspring or from one generation to the next.
Okay.
So you're being raised by a parent who was traumatized.
Right.
Their ways of adapting to that trauma, both healthy and unhealthy ways, are going to flavor the way they raise you.
Give me an example of that.
So you've got, and I actually see this all the time in very, very real life settings. You've got a mother who is now a single mother, and they're a single mother because they were a victim of domestic violence.
Okay.
And they've got a son or a daughter or multiple children. And they subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, indicating to their kids that relationships are dangerous or men are dangerous. How do they do that? By they'll be walking along on the street and a man will approach them and they'll just instinctively seize up, hold the kid's hand tighter, pull them away to the other side.
Right.
All those things, momentary reactions.
And that's going to absolutely
time.
flavor the kid's experience with men in the future.
Exactly.
That totally makes sense.
But did you know that it also, interestingly enough, can be passed in kind of a genetic fashion?
Anytime you say, did you know, and your no raises up an octave, odds are I don't. Because I'm about to learn something deep in Josh's brain.
Not deep in my brain. This is very real science, Jeff. So there's a whole study in genetics called epigenetics. And as everybody knows, I think genes are the chromosomes, the DNA that parents pass to their children.
Okay.
Kids get half their DNA from their mother and half their DNA from their father.
And like 70% from midichlorians.
Fucking midichlorians. Your genes don't change. But what's really interesting is that there's all these molecules, proteins, tiny little chemicals that attach to parts of our DNA all the time.
Okay.
And control or influence how those genes are expressed. So stress is a huge component of how genes are expressed. Mm-hmm. So if you are in an incredibly stressful environment, your genes may not function as well. Others might turn on more to help deal with that stress. So you really have a synergistic reaction. You inherit these genes from your parents, and then their raising of you helps control how some of those genes are turned on. And that's how generational trauma is actually passed.
Fascinating.
In a couple of different ways. Some obviously psychological and some much more biochemical.
How do we know this?
Through the meticulous work of what we call bench scientists. So folks that are stuck in labs, they get an idea, they develop a hypothesis, and they use a scientific method of meticulously looking at under electron microscopes, with different chemical reactions, how genes, how DNA, and how different chemicals affect that DNA, and then in many cases extrapolate it to what they see in human behavior.
So, okay, Josh, I've got the follow-up to The Big Bang Theory. You and I are going to write it. Bench Scientists, and it's a workplace comedy about those guys, because that sounds like the most boring thing ever, but I'm also so glad we have those guys. Thank God no one's watching this podcast yet, so no one can steal that idea.
Right.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.